Right, so Keir Starmer will now officially be having a very, very bad day, as Jewish former African National Congress politician under Nelson Mandela turned global arms sales campaigner Andrew Feinstein is going to stand against Keir Starmer at the next general election. It is official. He has now formally announced his decision to stand after much consultation amongst local groups and his fellow residents of Holborn and St Pancras, and the response has clearly been a positive one. Meaning a guy who could be described as Keir Starmer's worst nightmare, a candidate who is everything he isn't, will be taking him on at the general election, and the people of Holborn will actually have a decent socialist, not to mention honest candidate, to vote for at last. Right, so this is good news, amazingly good news, a proper good news story. For a change, I seem so rarely to offer these up, don't I, these days? But news of a positive nature has come out as Andrew Feinstein, after weeks of will he or won't he conjecture, following an endorsement from the anti-Starmer campaign group Okisa, Andrew Feinstein is going to stand at the general election as an independent candidate against Keir Starmer in Holborn and St Pancras. For those unfamiliar with him, Andrew Feinstein is the Jewish son of Holocaust survivors and is a massive long-time critic of Keir Starmer. He is a self-described proud lefty Jew. He's an activist, a filmmaker, an author, and also a former politician in his native South Africa. However, he now lives in Holborn and St Pancras and has done for the last 20-odd years. In South Africa, he was elected to stand for the African National Congress under the then leadership of Nelson Mandela, the very first democratic elections held there all the way back in 1994. His time as a South African MP largely spent working as an advisor on economics and finance and served on the Finance Committee there. But notably, Feinstein introduced the first ever motion on the Holocaust in South African history, stating that previous suffering by the Afrikaners at the hands of the British or of the Jews by the Nazis in no way justified the brutal oppression suffered by black South Africans or Palestinians. This was back in the 1990s now. But Feinstein stood down from South African politics in 2001, resigning in objection to the failure to investigate the corrupt South African arms deal, which was notable in its corruption due to procurement. Think COVID VIP lanes, but with guns instead. Feinstein, in fact, wrote a book on the subject called The Shadow World Inside the Global Arms Trade. He moved to London after his political career in South Africa ended and has been no less busy here, albeit in a far less legislative manner, up until now, hopefully, that is. He's the director of Shadow World Investigations, formerly Corruption Watch UK, specialising in the global arms trade, but also investigates other forms of corruption as well. And he's also a board member of one of my favourite alternative news outlets, Declassified UK, who I cite as a source for many a video here on this channel. He's a staunch opponent of apartheid in all of its forms, a lifelong supporter of the plight of the Palestinian people, which his native South Africa have shown too, by taking Israel, of course, to the International Court of Justice. So we have, standing against Keir Starmer then, who supports the State of Israel unequivocally, a guy who has drawn direct comparisons between what Israel continues to do against Palestinians with the apartheid he saw in South Africa committed by whites against blacks. We have a guy who has written extensively on the global arms trade and is director of an organisation which investigates this, standing against Keir Starmer, who still backs arms sales to the Israeli regime despite what they've done. We have Starmer, who claims to stand against those critical of the so-called Jewish state of Israel and claims to have eradicated anti-Semitism from his party, standing against the Jewish son of Holocaust survivors, who has called out Israeli atrocity on many occasions, just like many of his other fellow Jews have as well, who declare action abhorrent and not in their name, and definitely not in the name of their faith. And we have a guy standing against Keir Starmer who walked away from his life as a politician in South Africa because he put his own principles first, standing against Keir Starmer, a guy whose principles seemingly change depending on the weather. Andrew Feinstein factually is everything Keir Starmer isn't. He is his worst nightmare, which makes Feinstein absolutely the candidate to back here. When the outlook of British politics has been so poor, and certainly not helped by Starmer and the party he leads no longer offering anything like hope or change, Feinstein's candidacy, now made official, does offer that. If anyone is capable of toppling Starmer, despite the massive majority he appears to have, Feinstein, I believe, is the guy to do that. And without his seat, Starmer cannot, of course, become Prime Minister. Feinstein's penned a piece in Declassified UK, all of which is a blazing piece. Brilliant article, and I absolutely recommend going to their website and reading all of it. Here's an excerpt. Our democracy is in crisis. The two main parties are virtually indistinguishable in their offers of permanent austerity, forever wars, and environmental degradation. Keir Starmer, the MP for Holborn and St Pancras, where my family and I have lived for around 22 years, is emblematic of this crisis. His politics are mendacious, unprincipled, and in the interests of his billionaire donors rather than the constituents he was elected to serve. I have seen real leadership in action. I was privileged to serve under Nelson Mandela as an MP in South Africa. His leadership was selfless, principled, accountable, transparent and honest. Everything that Keir Starmer is not. His almost immediate abandonment of many of the 10 progressive pledges on which he was elected to lead the Labour Party is a clear sign he cannot be trusted. Starmer has now gone a step too far by refusing to support an unqualified ceasefire and a halt to arms sales to Israel amid the greatest human tragedy since World War II, the genocide being committed in Gaza. How is it possible that a former human rights lawyer, who must see the horrific images that we all view on our screens every day, has not even commented on the highest court in the world's interim ruling that Israel is likely committing genocide and ethnic cleansing? The ICC's decision to seek an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes, including starvation of civilians, willfully causing great suffering and cruel treatment, cast Starmer's support for a siege of Gaza, cutting off water and power, in an even more appalling light. His attempts to deny such support, despite video evidence confirming it, smacks of a remarkable lack of honesty or contrition. He has backed the Conservative government's indefensible position on the crisis, rather than demanding an end to the carnage, to occupation and to apartheid, the only route to a just peace in the region. The Labour Party's appalling stance on Gaza has fuelled a concern, enunciated most explicitly in a report written by Martin Ford KC, that the party operates a hierarchy of racism. It oxymoronically expels lifelong anti-racist Jews, supposedly to combat anti-Semitism, while taking little if any action against Islamophobia and anti-black racism. As Nelson Mandela opined, you are either against all forms of racism and discrimination, or you are part of the racism problem. Can you imagine that guy going toe-to-toe in a local hustings against Keir Starmer, laying all of that out and demanding answers from him over these and more to his face in front of a crowd of voters? Heck, you could sell tickets and people would be queuing around the block. Also, in light of those arrest warrants requests now having come from the International Criminal Court, will complicity charges be making their way to Starmer in the near future along with others? But also, there's the matter of Holborn just needing a good local MP again. Starmer has caused division and introduced the same authoritarianism to local politics there as he has so nationally in the Labour Party across the country, and no doubt would everywhere should he reach power. The response on social media to this announcement today has been swift and overwhelmingly positive. Sarah J. Packwood, for example, tweeted out, "It is time for politics to serve the people. Andrew Feinstein. I so want to see Andrew Feinstein defeat Keir Starmer in the GE. He is standing against him in Holborn and St Pancras, calling on all socialists and other progressives to get behind him and support his campaign." Frank Owen's legendary paintbrush echoed my sentiments in his tweet, saying, "Andrew Feinstein is a pro-Corbyn / pro-Palestine Jew whose ancestors were killed in the Holocaust. As a politician in South Africa, he opposed apartheid and worked alongside Nelson Mandela. And he's standing against Starmer in Holborn and St Pancras. He's Starmer's worst nightmare." And the Liverpool Community Independents have written, "Good to see former ANC MP and advisor to Nelson Mandela, Andrew Feinstein, standing against Starmer." It is good to see. It's incredibly good to see. And many others have tweeted out how they've already donated to Feinstein's crowdfunder to help him do this. Also open today on GoFundMe, called the Andrew Feinstein Campaign. If you care to go and find it, please do. Let's see how quickly that target can be reached. Faster it does, the more of a fright it's going to give Starmer. Campaigners and volunteers for Andrew's campaign are going to be out in force across Holborn and St Pancras today, from around 4:30 p.m. at the train stations. They're armed with leaflets and information, so if you live there, make sure you don't miss out on them. Campaign groups having given Feinstein their endorsement already include We Are Collective, For the Many and Okisa. So this is a campaign that is already right out of the starting blocks, already flying. If that doesn't underline just how much appetite there is to see change, for hope, and to see the back of a particularly dishonest, overly ambitious, self-serving charlatan like Keir Starmer, who the media have given far too easy a ride to and who needs to be held to account. Well overdue being held to account for his conduct, for his actions, for his words and deeds, and how much he flip-flops on them, I don't know what does. This is one election campaign all eyes should be on, one of the most important contests that's going to be happening of this general election. This is the one that could send shockwaves to establishment interests. That we've all had enough.